On this episode of Speaking with Intention, we sit down with Amber Naslund, speaker, writer, author, and enterprise sales and customer success leader at LinkedIn with 20 years of marketing experience. She shares with us some of the highs and lows of her career and decisions that some thought were questionable, pivotal moments that have impacted her life, and her recommendations for how you can continue on your Speaking with Intention journey. If you're ready, like I'm ready, let's dig in. On this episode of Speaking with Intention, we sit down with speaker, author, marketer of 20 years, and LinkedIn sales and customer success leader, Amber Naslund. She tells us a little bit about some of her career highs and lows and what people thought about it. On this episode of Speaking with Intention, we sit down with author, speaker, marketing veteran, enterprise sales and customer success leader at LinkedIn, Amber Naslund. She tells us a little bit about her career highs and lows and the questions people asked, what have been impactful moments that have really shaped her today, and recommendations for how others can continue on their Speaking with Intention journey. If you're ready, like I'm ready, let's dig in. Hello, 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 and welcome to another episode of the Speaking with Intention podcast. I am super excited to have speaker, author, marketing veteran, sales and customer success leader at LinkedIn, Amber Naslund, on the show to talk about her journey today. So, hello, Amber. Welcome to the Speaking with Intention podcast. How are you?
Hello, thank you so much for having me. I'm fabulous. I'm so excited to be here.
We were just talking because it is February right now, and so we're in the Midwest where we don't see the sun for days and weeks at a time. It's not as bad as Alaska, but I certainly do not think I could be located in a geographic region where you know that you are not going to have sunlight for like multiple hours of the day for like months at a time. Like, how do people really survive there? I don't understand it.
For real, there's a woman I follow on TikTok who is located in, I believe it's pronounced Svarsbad or Svarsbard or something like that. It's like far northern Sweden. And they have the like forever, it's like night 24 hours a day
Oh
at
my
this point because she's so far north and she loves it. But I keep watching her videos thinking, I don't think I could do that.
I don't think I can do that. I mean, but therein lies like the good part is really whatever you want to experience in this world, even if it's 24 hours of darkness for a period of the year, like you really can. Like you
There's a
can
place for
find
you.
that.
There's a place for you. And
There
it's
is.
in very northern Sweden in the Arctic Circle. So like you do you.
Absolutely. So I feel like, and I don't tell me if any of this rings a bell, because I feel like the first time that I heard of you, ran into you, it was way back in say 20, probably like 2011, 2012-ish. I want to say you had just published a book, and it was when people were really starting to pay attention to social media and like the opportunity that it held and like the different platforms and what you could actually do with it in terms of being a content creator. And you had come to a conference here in Columbus, Ohio for small business owners. I believe it was hosted by the Small Business Development Center and Mike Bowers, who is still there and like breathing life into that place. He is like die hard for small businesses. Does any of this like sound familiar, or am I making all of this
Really?
up?
Oh no, you're not making that up at all. I granted you are aging me because
As I am myself,
so
yes.
long ago.
The
I
early
know,
days of
I know,
social
like
media.
back when we were kids. Um, but yeah, that I absolutely I remember that event and Mike, and that was super fun. That was right in the, I think it was right after or right around when the book was published. So we were just doing tour around and talking to a lot of people. But that was super fun. And I happen to love, I have a soft spot for the small business community because I just think it's so full of amazing human beings doing cool stuff on a shoestring and a prayer half the time. And it's just so much, I like, it's so fun to work with those people because they're energizing. And as a former business owner myself, I appreciate the hard work that goes into it. So I love that community completely.
So have you not been doing much consulting with your small business, kind of been focusing on working the full-time gig and working on your brand? Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Very much so. My job at LinkedIn, I've been at LinkedIn for 5.5, almost 6 years now, and it is a very demanding role. So I just
Mm.
really don't have as much space and time as I used to do side gig stuff. Occasionally I will still do that more gratis, like, just pro bono work
Mm.
to help people with stuff, but I wish I had more hours in the day. I need a clone or
Don't
something.
we all? Well, it's coming. Like that, I think that's the
Right?
moral of the story is that your future clone is like right around the corner. And who is it? Is it Tina Fey that has that commercial that was on during the Super Bowl where she was like, I wanted to go on all of these great vacations, but then I couldn't. So I hired clones of myself. And then like it's right around the
One of the
corner.
only benevolent things I can think of about having a clone is like we could all go experience different things, but yeah, no,
I think I'd get jealous of where I would send my clone and then where I would be. Yeah, like
yeah,
that
unless
was
you
the
can have,
thing.
okay, we're getting really far afield here, but like if you could have this clear consciousness of, anyway, well, dystopian future.
Well, kind of looking a little bit backwards, I'd love to kind of start with a couple of key like moments or experiences that really kind of shaped who you are and where you are today, do you think?
Oh my goodness. Well, there's been a couple. I think first and foremost was me rage quitting a job. And it was really after I'd had my daughter. I was a single mom. She was a
You said
tiny.
rage quitting.
Rage
That's
quitting.
Oh, okay. All right. New terminology. Let me write that down. Rage
Yeah, it's like I
quitting.
don't know. I think it.
Sounds like it went really well. Sounds like it was a smooth transition.
Yeah, I mean, I think that term maybe comes from the gaming community. Did I co-opt that from them? But I was working in a pretty like corporate marketing gig, and I was a new mom. And it was kind of my first introduction to how difficult workplaces can be for moms, for women. And ended up with a boss who was completely inflexible and not understanding about having an infant at home and being a single mom. And I decided that was untenable for me. Like I didn't need to put up with being minimized or being babysat or micromanaged. So I quit without a plan. But it was one of those pivotal moments where you jump without a net, and I didn't really know if it was going to work out in my favor. But I hung out a like a freelance shingle for marketing and content development, and thanks to social media, met a man named David Alston, who is still a good friend like to this day and doing amazing things. But he was the then CMO of a startup called Radian 6. And I met him. It was either on Twitter or Plurk, if you can believe it. Anybody who remembers that platform,
Plurk. Wow. Now you're really going back. You're going to mention MySpace in a couple minutes or
or LiveJournal, or one of those. But we got to talking, and he was like, "Hey, would you like to help us develop some content? We could really use some help with like the social media stuff." So I joined him as a contractor, which then parlayed into a full-time job, and that was my first foray into tech, and marketing on like the B2B tech side. And that really was my launch pad for kind of my current career trajectory. Um, and I would say career-wise, the second kind of pivotal moment that we talked a little bit about beforehand was that I was a business owner for a while. So after Radian 6 was a very successful startup, we scaled it and exited to Salesforce. And after that sale, I was kind of like, what do I want to do with myself? And I ended up starting a business with a partner, and it was a wild ride, but ultimately like wildly not successful. Like that,
mm,
yeah, that business really blew up on me in a not great way, and um, affected me personally, wiped out my life savings.
mm.
Like it was just kind of one of those moments in my life where I was kind of at rock bottom and everything felt really difficult. And the two roles that I took, kind of going back into the workforce the years after that, I was laid off like twice in a row.
Mm,
So that
mm,
kind of era of my life was really pivotal because it made me dig deep for, who am I? What am I about? I realized how much of myself was tied to my professional identity and how much of my
mm.
self-worth was tied to what I did for a living. So feeling like a failure, like a fraud, like I didn't know what I was doing, I think really was a turning point in my ability to kind of be introspective, but also find some courage and grit that I didn't know I had. So that was
Mm.
cool.
Interesting, really interesting because so I think one of the things that COVID helped people see kind of in that same vein of being laid off, losing your job through no fault of your own necessarily, is how much of their self-identity is tied
Yeah,
up into that position, into the work, how you've poured in. And this is what I heard when I was working on a focus group project in connecting with women who were unemployed and underemployed, impacted by COVID. And, what's challenging you to getting back into the workforce. And a lot of women were like, I really have to step back and assess like who I am outside of this job because I gave my all to this job. I, like tied up a lot of like who I was and what made me valuable and important there. And when I was laid off suddenly or let go, I really didn't know what I was doing because I really didn't know like who I was without this job.
absolutely. I identify with all of that. So losing the business was really hard because that felt like a personal failing, especially
Mm-hmm.
because so much of my finances that were tied into that. I felt like I'd failed my daughter. I felt like it just, there was a lot in that. And the journey of kind of realizing how much of your career at times is not fully within your own control. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't matter whether you have a business, because like your business as a small business owner depends on the ability to find business, find clients,
Absolutely.
dependencies there. And then when you work for somebody else, obviously your livelihood is tied to the success or failure of somebody else's business, large or small. And it really does force you to do the exercise of what am I doing? Like what am I here for on this rock? And how do I find meaning and purpose and identity, outside of what I do for a living? Because it's easy to fall in that trap. And I think those of us who are high achievers, go-getters, know that intimately because we've poured so much of ourselves into what we do professionally. It can be really easy to lose sight of who we are in the midst of that. And in the long run, I think it was a blessing that all those things happened. I feel much more secure in my own skin now than I ever have, but it was a
Mm-hmm.
journey to get there. It was not, I spent a lot of years pretty lost. Thank you, therapy, for.
Thank you, therapy. We there's no person out there that cannot benefit from having a great sounding board and somebody that's gonna like listen to your BS and be like, okay, so you've talked for 35 minutes and 25 of those has been complete BS.
Yep.
Now that we've got that out of the way, let's actually dig in and do some of the actual work. And so, because that was going to be one of my questions, like what were some of the strategies, tools, resources did you use to kind of sort of do that work of being introspective and figuring out like what's important to you and what is next on the journey? And it sounds like therapy was definitely one of those key tools for you. Are there any others that you can recall?
Yeah, therapy was pretty important. But I also am a huge journaler.
Mm,
Writing is a big part of who I am, and words is sort of my medium. Other people may paint or write music or whatever your creative outlet was, but words have always been an important thing for me. Joan Didion, who is an amazing author, I think I'm paraphrasing her quote, but it was basically, I write to discover what I think.
that's
So that's
deep.
very much been true for me. Putting word vomit into my journal and being able to just like brain dump or stream of consciousness, right, really has led to some breakthroughs. It's been cathartic. It's been a very helpful way for me to stay in touch with myself. And I still journal to this day, almost every day. And it's an important aspect of that. Um, the other thing I think is allowing myself to find some community of people who have
Mm.
all experienced similar losses. It was very difficult for me at first because I felt a lot of shame and it was hard for me to reach out to people and seek support. But once I found those few trusted guidepost people in my world who could make me feel seen and validated even when I was in pain, but also who had also been through difficult things and reassured me that there was a light at the end of the tunnel. I really believe we heal through community and we heal through belonging and being with other people who have some adjacent experiences. And that was a really important part for me.
No, I love that community aspect. And it's so important on the entrepreneurial journey to have a community. It's sometimes difficult to create a community or connect with a community of entrepreneurs that have experienced, say, a business failure, especially if they're women or people of color, because you do take it. Somebody was just telling me yesterday they had a similar experience and they took it as such a personal failure, and they were like, I don't understand like why I'm taking this as a personal failure when others, they like go ahead, they fail fast, they dust themselves off and keep going. Like there's not this level of shame around it. So he was sort of saying the same thing of like finding a community where he could just kind of heal and acknowledge and then sort of again, pick yourself up and figure out what happens next. But I think for women and people of color, we take that as like a personal failure, when really it's not, because as you said, like running a business and being in a job, like there's 175 other factors that impact the success of that business, of that job, what have you. And you are really, a slice of the pie. Like if you're an entrepreneur, yeah, you can be a bigger slice of the pie, but you are contingent on the activities of others. So, yeah, I love that recommendation of like changing that mindset and doing the journaling.
Mhm.
Whatever it is, I think when we're in our darkest moments and we're trying to figure out who we are, having the space to be yourself with yourself,
Yeah.
whatever that looks like. I know I have like journaled and been surprised at what I allowed myself to write.
Yep.
I've journaled and been like, is that what I really think?
Isn't that wild? Those moments where words tumble out of you and you don't even realize those are the things you were thinking or feeling.
Mm-hmm.
I think those have been some of those breakthrough, scary moments sometimes where you're like, is that really what I'm feeling right now?
Yeah,
When you can attach a word to something, especially things that are very heavy, like feelings of loneliness or um, feelings of confidence or moments where you're feeling yourself and you're like, okay, I'm actually feeling great right now. These are the things I feel like I'm really good at. I had to do a lot of wordsmithing to kind of zero in on those moments of character identity. And journaling really helped me find words for stuff that I wasn't sure I could find. If you just had to sit there and talk with me, I would probably stare at a wall.
absolutely.
Uh,
Absolutely. Or not give myself permission to think it and then
yeah,
let alone actually say it, right?
yeah.
Like
Well, and then,
we're our
journaling is
best
a brave,
filters.
safe space, right? Because you can like write whatever and know that somebody else is not going to be reading. I joke with my sister all the time. I'm like, if something inopportune happens to me and I get hit by a bus tomorrow, burn my journals. Just like, please go in
Absolutely.
the
Please
journal.
do not let another living being read these thoughts,
Yeah.
please.
Please don't. Please don't. Otherwise, y'all are going to have a very different impression of me, possibly. But yeah, journaling has been an important aspect for me. I think that's one of the interesting things about social media too, is that I word vomit out loud a lot, sometimes to my own detriment, but it has also helped with the community aspect because social media has helped us break out of the constraints of like geographical co-location or people you work with or people you happen to live near. Like it removes all the barriers of geographic
Hmm.
limitations and things. So you can find community in people who are far flung across the world, but have very shared experiences. And I think I like to think that's part of like the good part that social media has brought to the world. There's a lot of
That
nice.
is the good parts. Yes. I mean, when Zuck said he believes that this is going to help increase the global community, like he was onto something there. We won't talk about the rest of the things, but I'm in agreement with you. And, I was just like going through your LinkedIn profile, rereading an incomplete list of my career limiting moves because I feel like this is so, again, like that vulnerability and being like vulnerable and kind of showing up authentically. And so I'd love to hear you talk about a couple of those career moves that I know other people questioned, and you were like, this is what I gotta do. Like, tell us about a couple of those, and like where did you dig in to kind of figure out that decision and kind of have the courage to kind of make some of those decisions?
I think one of the bigger ones, and it's actually one of the more recent ones, is that when I joined LinkedIn, I had been in leadership roles for quite a long time, and quite senior leadership roles in marketing organizations, built teams, like had fancy titles, sat in boardrooms. And when I came to LinkedIn after having my teeth kicked in a few times in the career world, I gave myself permission to take a step backwards. And backwards maybe isn't even the right word, but I came to LinkedIn as an individual contributor. So I had no fancy title, no fancy organization, like no big high powered job. I came into an IC role that was squarely in my wheelhouse, like a job that I knew I could do really well, to rebuild some of my confidence and to give me some breathing room to figure out what it was I wanted to do next. And that came with a pay cut. That came with, the ego check of like, I don't have a vice president title anymore. Are people going to think I'm not vice president worthy now because I'm not in, like, I don't have that on my business card?
Mm-hmm.
That took a fair bit of courage to do that. Um, and even more recently, in the last couple of years, I made the leap after 20 some odd years in marketing. I made the leap to a field leadership role. So giving myself permission to do something that was a little out of my comfort zone, that was going to require me to be a bit of a beginner again in some aspects of my career and be in that growth learning mindset mode, and let it be okay that I was coming into a job where I was like, I don't know, I haven't mastered this because I haven't been doing this my whole life. So jumping tracks in a career, and again,
Mm-hmm.
letting that be okay to be a frontline manager again, to check my ego at the door and instead look at this as like a twist and turn on what is never really a linear path, um, was, I think, really important for me. But it's weirdly the thing that a lot of people resonate with and come and ask me about because they have felt constrained by needing to take very linear steps in their career. And if I'm not getting promoted, or if I'm not like hustle, 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 fighting for the grind, that I'm not doing enough. And it's been like healing to talk to other people and realize that they find comfort in the fact that I stopped chasing titles and stopped chasing, rank and file, and was more interested in the journey than the destination. And it's been a really good thing for me. It's probably not for everybody, but it was a pretty pivotal set of decisions that I made that I think were, people scratched their head a little bit at me at the time. But now I'm
At the
fine.
time, but
Yeah,
now that's a very kind of like understood strategy, right? Where people kind of are more so recognizing that, as you said, it's not a linear path. It's going to have a lot of twists and turns. Even the nature of job titles, right? Like, I feel I'm out here in Columbus, Ohio, and we're the land of like JP Morgan Chase, and like everybody at JP Morgan Chase is like a senior VP.
of
And
course.
so if you don't know this, like you don't realize that that's literally everybody's title at JP Morgan Chase. Like senior VP isn't as fancy as it sounds,
Yeah.
but
And like in the agency world, like I think everybody in an agency is either like a senior something or a vice president something. And,
They
having all
are.
the fancy titles, you realize that the titles are a bunch of BS too. Like,
It's all made up, right? I mean, these are all kind of like arbitrary boundaries and names and characteristics that don't really mean anything. But
right.
I think being able to look past that, as you
Mhm.
said, and kind of look at the opportunity and
Yeah.
give yourself permission to be new at something and to be a newbie and to like say, I don't know, I'm learning it just like all of y'all are. I mean, I got a little more career like acumen behind me, but it's not in this particular place and space. I think it's something that also really can. It's scary. Like it's scary to go in to a professional setting and be like, I know about 60% of what I need to know here,
Yeah.
but a lot of places I think are coming to the understanding of number one, there's a lot of value that people coming from outside industries can bring to your industry with that experience that they have, and having that outsider insider perspective really gives you a greater understanding of where the fissures as well as the opportunities exist. But then also, for the individual, like taking that first step to be a beginner is how you get to the next level and how you learn more and advance and accelerate. And not being afraid to be a beginner is
It's been an
something.
interesting experience too, as like a person who is a people leader too, because I have a team that I have to go ask all the time to make me smarter about things that they know that I don't. And it really democratizes like power dynamics sometimes when
Mm.
you can go to your team and be like, I don't know the answer to this question. You do. You're an expert.
You tell me.
I am not. And my job is to herd some cats, but like you have more functional expertise than I do in this. It's been very rewarding and gratifying to help like empower the people who are on my team to feel like I don't gatekeep all the answers and I am not the end all be all of knowledge. That's been really fun. And it's been cool to be in an environment where I get to be the kid who asks the dumb questions or be the
Mm.
one who, like, I don't know what that acronym means. Like, I don't know how to, or I don't know how to do this part of my job. And all credit to the people who hired me into this role because they saw the potential in the background I brought and realized that there would be a learning curve for me. But gave me that chance anyway. And so I think I approach that every day as like trying to make sure that they feel good about that decision and keeping my growth mindset open to be like, I got to go stuff some more knowledge in my head so that I can earn the job that they've given me.
Now, you have been at quite a few tech companies, and I would love to hear you kind of talk a little bit about looking around, I'm sure, and being like, gosh, I'm like the only woman here. That's so weird. I mean, what has, and especially, I mean, yes, now we still see a shortage of women and people of color in the tech space. There's absolutely 110% more, at least awareness of it. And in some instances, actual, steps in order to eradicate that. So we have made a great amount of progress, but there's still plenty of places and spaces where you are, in fact, like the only woman or person of color, and you're looking around and there's like some tough conversations that you somehow end up finding yourself involved with or leading. Tell us a
Yeah.
little bit about what that experience has been like.
I will say I'm fortunate now that I think we're a little bit of an anomaly at LinkedIn and specifically in my particular area of the organization. We are quite balanced in terms of gender parity, at least. We still have a lot of work to do with ethnic diversity and cultural diversity, but I think we have about 50-50. My leader is a woman.
Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah, we have a lot of leaders in our global kind of sales organization who are women, and that is very inspiring and empowering to see that much like leadership level women around me. I think that's awesome. And
Mm-hmm.
but I know that we are a little bit of the exception in the rule because I came through several tech companies where that was not the case. And
Mm-hmm.
most of the men in leadership and on boards were typical middle-aged Caucasian men. And that's just the makeup of the tech world. And what becomes acceptable in that dynamic is that you so often as a woman get labeled with things that you'd never call a man abrasive in the same way that you
Mm,
get told an outspoken woman that you're abrasive. The number of times I had people sit me down and tell me to tone it down,
mm.
that I was too outspoken, too something
You're
like so.
so impassioned about this topic. We're gonna need you to like take it down a
Right.
notch. It's really
Uh-huh.
making us uncomfortable. Yeah,
Yeah, or
yeah.
like your intensity is a lot.
Mm.
Been told that I'm intimidating because
And that was literally on the tip of my tongue. Intimidating. People love to come out with that one.
it's like, do you turn around and talk to the dude who's in charge and tell him he's intimidating or abrasive or shrill? That's another one that was my favorite. I've had like the typical stereotypical comments about being emotional as a woman
Mm,
or having my emotions too much on the forefront. Meanwhile, I used to work for men who threw chairs across conference rooms and
absolutely.
were upset. And you're like, that not
That's
emotional?
not emotional. Yeah, no,
No.
absolutely.
Um, so I have probably had to deal with it less than some, and I'm an incredibly privileged position because I'm an upper middle class white woman, so I don't have nearly the barriers that other people do. But you definitely feel othered in the tech
Hmm.
world when you're a woman and you're like, do I belong here? Number of times I've been mistaken for the person who needed to get the coffee. I've been
Mm,
asked notes. I'm the one who's asked to order lunch. And like I'm at the same rank and file as all the other people sitting in the boardroom, but I'm the one they asked to dial and order lunch that day. It's like
hmm.
that's not a coincidence.
That's not a coincidence. I'm not the only person with a dialing finger that's operational right now. Yeah,
Correct.
yeah.
So I've again, I have experienced less strife in that world than I think other people have, but I've definitely observed it too. And I've had to also defend women who have been on my teams over the years from similar dynamics where they've experienced
Mm,
blatant sexism or racism in the workplace. And I've had to come to their defense as the people leader and have very difficult conversations with people about those things. I just don't think you can be in the business world today and not have that be part of the dynamic. And it is especially prevalent in tech because it is such a male dominated industry still to this day.
right. White male bro
Yeah.
dominated
The
industry.
like,
But we are making it, as you said, there are some really big changes. And, that's really one of the ways in which a lot of that change is happening is through the allyship, right? We've got to have people who recognize the significance, the importance of having diversity of all of the varieties. And let's start with the big ones. Let's start with gender, let's start with race, let's go
yeah.
LBGTQ, right? Like it's a journey. And it's not ever going to be a sprint if we really want to get to some level of equity and parity that we're looking for. So I love that allyship has been an important way that you've sort of utilized your platform of being a woman in tech, having some level, because you got to have the level of rank. You got to have like, yeah, I was just saying to somebody else, you got to have like all of your armor. You got to
Yeah.
be like armed with all of the data points. You've got to have, a good 10 years behind you. And even then, people are still going to challenge you.
Oh, they do. I
But
mean, I still get like nonsense in my comments all the
she said
time on
nonsense.
social media with men stepping into my comments to somehow try to denigrate my experience, my understanding. I had a very specific experience when I first started at LinkedIn with a guy who I'd known kind of through the industry for years who showed up on my post about being laid off and looking for work to basically like lambast me in the comments about how unqualified I was for all the jobs I've ever.
Wow.
And you're like,
Wow.
what? Like, who are you and where? So there's like this constant feeling like you have to prove yourself over and over to randos on the internet. I've lost a lot of patience for that, but it is a thing that I think women come up against all the time is we are constantly having our expertise and qualifications called into question in ways that do not happen the same way for men in the industry.
Absolutely. And or just basically the world. I mean, yeah,
Yeah, I'm trying to
basically
speak
the
to my own
world.
sphere of experience here, but yes, for sure.
I mean,
And that's why
women
I'm
will get
so,
our experience of having children gets called to question by men, and they're
oh,
not really even in that space. So it's just be,
doesn't matter
you
what
know,
we
just
say. It doesn't matter what we say. Like there's some guy waiting in the wings waiting to challenge us on it. That's just like a universal constant, I
it
feel like.
really is. We do love men here on the
Thank you.
show, but we love the men who are the allies, right?
Yep.
Because I know I've had experiences where people have come on to some of my posts. I think one time I was posting about something and this white woman actually like took the time to write in the comment section how her son was looking for work and posted his resume like on my comment. I was like, what in the what? I
Oh,
had to
like,
delete
oh,
her comment,
really?
but then I also had to like follow up with her on direct message and be like, why would you utilize my platform to try and generate job opportunities for your son? Like why would you try to use me in that way? Because like that's just so inappropriate, you know?
And
And so
so
it's
entitled.
certainly
So entitled.
it
It's
was entitled, yes. And so it certainly isn't only, men, like anybody can exist in this space. And as much as we love social media, that's one of the things that it also brings with it, right? It's just sort of the trolls that go looking for ways to be controversial and try and utilize other people's platform to get some attention to express their inappropriate
I,
thoughts that nobody actually asked them to share.
but you're
Um,
right. Listen, I should also say that there are so many men in my spheres that are absolute outspoken advocates, champions, feminists that are doing the work and out there trying really, really hard to use their voices to change that landscape. And I would be remiss to not
we
acknowledge.
absolutely need men in the fight, right? We absolutely. So I don't want any male listeners out there to think that we do not want you, need you, or appreciate you in the battle for all of the equalities. So please stay
And
with
some
us.
like listen, some of the men in my professional experience have been the people who have helped, find me seats at the table or say my name in rooms I'm not in. That have
Absolutely.
been some of my most important allies and advocates and champions over the years. And I would not be where I am today without some of the most, amazing men in my midst. So don't take my generic comments. Not all men. Yeah, like I
No,
know.
right. That's exactly it. We are not like stereotyping or otherizing in this space. So we're drilling down to the last couple minutes. Amber, tell me, what are you reading these days? What are a couple things that you're reading or that you've recently read that we should take a look at?
So I am a complete book addict. So I always usually have multiple reads going on, and I usually have like nonfiction reads alongside my fiction reads.
I'm glad to hear other people say that because I sometimes get like bored, like a little bit while I'm reading the book. So I'm reading a couple at the same time just to kind of keep myself like
Well,
overly
and there are
engaged.
times where I'm in the mode of like professional development and I want to read something like that. And then there are times where I'm like, nope, bring me like fairies and
Mm-hmm.
swords and things like that. So like on the fiction side, I read a lot of fantasy. I read a lot of mystery thriller stuff. I love suspense. I love that kind of thing. Right now I'm reading the Sarah J. Maas series for the Throne of Glass, which is very super popular. I hadn't read it before, but
The Throne of Glass.
Throne of Glass. It's like
Okay.
fairies and fairy romance and
Oh, fairy romance.
oh,
Oh,
that's like
okay.
and there's it's a little spicy in places. So if you're not into that, just like FYI, like full disclosure. But on the nonfiction side, one of the books that I've been reading recently, I have a teenager who is about to go to college in a year and a half. And she is much like her mama, a little bit too much of an overachiever.
Mm,
And this book is called Never Enough. And it explores sort of how culture of adolescence and the constant pressure to do and be more is really damaging the
absolutely.
mental health of our teenagers. And I've watched it play out with my kid, and a friend of mine recommended this book to me. And it's both gratifying and validating in places, but it's also really eye-opening and frightening when you realize how this is one of the like the negative impacts of social media, the comparison trap these kids get in, and the constant push to achieve, go to top 10 schools, like do all the extracurriculars. This like it's just never enough.
Oh,
And
absolutely. This
so it's been
sounds like a really good read. You know, having a daughter, my daughter is 10, and I really try to avoid that because I mean, and it's very, I mean, you have to both guide your children to kind of avoid it. You have to do the work of building the self-confidence, as we said, without external labels being attached to, but rather what it is that makes you, you know, special, unique, your purpose. When I worked at Denison University out here in Ohio, which is a small liberal arts college, that was back in like 2006 to 2010. And it was kind of just like my first realization that I am very different than
Mhm.
the millennials at that time as a Gen Xer,
Yeah,
because they were all involved in like, you know, six or seven extracurriculars. They were all the president of everything. Like, heaven forbid you should just go and be like on a committee. They
right,
all had like overwhelmed course loads that they were trying to maintain. They all were trying to do some sort of like job or something outside of, and I'm like, how in the hoot nanny are
right,
you, you know, and then, but then as the instructor, they're coming and they're like in tears because they feel like they've got too much on their plate. They've got parents that are like helicopter calling them and trying to understand like why they didn't go to class or what's going on with their assignments. And so it was just like, I was like, oh my God, is this what it's like? I was like, as a Gen Xer, I'm so fortunate to have neglectful parents that set
same.
out very few expectations for me. They were like,
I was
just don't
talking.
kill yourself during your
Oh,
latchkey
I mean, I
moment
was
at
talking to my
home.
daughter because I was like, listen, when I went to college, I knew I wanted to probably stay in the Midwest and probably go to a Big Ten university. So I applied to like three schools, got into the three, picked the campus I liked best, and then I went. And nowadays, like people are hiring consultants to help them build target lists and write essays
Uh,
and like 10 I just out of sheer curiosity inquired about one of these things, and the numbers of thousands of dollars that these consultants cost to help these kids navigate the process of just getting into college.
And
Not,
those are with the legitimate ones. You know, don't be
oh
somebody
yeah.
who tries to hire the illegal person. Like, that's, I
Oh,
mean,
no, I mean, it is the whole thing is wild to me. And if it wasn't so devastating to so many kids, I would almost find it
absolutely.
wonderful because it's like ridiculous. But similarly, you know, my daughter is going through wanting to apply for the National Honor Society, and you have to have so many like volunteer hours, and your or GPA needs to be at a certain level. And then she's like, well, how do I find time for this? Because she's a two-sport athlete, and you're just like, I don't know, four AP classes. I think I took two AP classes in all of college or in high school, and she's taken like eight.
It's, I mean, and so I see like my daughter, like, because she's, you know, watching YouTube and where, you know, the kids are now like a whole brand and they've got like their whole product line and they're on tour and they're still like being tutored and they're still going to school and all of this. And I just have to like constantly remind her, I'm like, your job is just to be a child and enjoy
Yeah,
this moment in time because you will never ever have this again. And so we don't, you know, you don't have to like have a business. You don't have to like invent something new. You don't have to like play three sports. Like we can just like be regular. I realize that the other kids are doing this and they're in fourth grade, but we're just gonna be more Gen X about it. Like you got an older mom
yeah,
and I'm not super interested in like all of that because it's legitimate pressure. These kids are putting
crazy.
themselves under high level pressure in middle school in preparation for high school. And in high school, they are experiencing nervous breakdowns, they are
Yeah.
experiencing anxiety, stress, all of these things that doesn't necessarily need to be on their plate at this day and age.
No, I Gen X parenting for the win because
Yeah.
I'm right there with you, and I'm trying. because I know when I look at my daughter, I didn't create this because I don't put that pressure on her. And that is
Right.
how her dad and I speak to her about what she, if anything, we're always trying to get her to do less. Like, it's okay
Right.
to
So
go
wheel
out
it in a little
in
bit. Yeah.
the backyard and do nothing. Do nothing. It's okay to do nothing. So we're having to have it
Well,
like,
that's a different lesson than what we have heard, at least as women, for such
oh
a
yeah,
long time, too. And to be able to kind of internalize that for yourself and then try and help your daughter internalize it that you are, in fact, enough. And sometimes the act of doing nothing is doing something for yourself.
it's critical. Like that is actual self-care, is having enough boundaries in your world to be like, I'm not going to do that one more thing or spend that one more hour or fry myself to a crisp and sacrifice sleep or social time or time with my family for the sake of achieving more. So my daughter
Absolutely.
and I talk a lot about, like, is this going to matter in 5 months, 5 years? Like, are you going to, I lost both my parents this last year. And I keep saying to her, like, neither one of my parents on their deathbed were sitting there wishing they'd worked more,
No,
or
that
that they
no one
had
ever
more
is.
notches on their resume, or like,
They
merch.
made more money than what they made in their life.
No,
Absolutely. Like,
that
it's
was
the
not,
honest truth.
that's not what matters at the end of it. So it is a task to try to keep the kids like balanced. But we take it one day at a time. Gen
We
X.
do. Yes, Gen X parents for the win here. Yeah, I think I told I like bursted a little bubble for my daughter recently because I said, you know, honey, that permanent record that they talk about at school. She was like, yeah. I was like, nobody cares about that. I was like, I said, I promise you, even when you finish elementary school, I said, nobody's gonna care
No,
that you missed 3 days without an
no.
excuse. Like nobody's going to care that you got like all, meeting expectations. I said they'll care insofar as what class you'll be in next year, and then it'll be never thought of or looked at again. And she was like, "What?
I
The
know. Isn't that
permanent
mind-blowing?
record isn't real?"
Oh yeah, I'll never forget that I got a threatening like letter that they were going to report me to the state for truancy because I took my kid out of school to take her with me to Washington D.C.
Oh
And
wow.
I was like, so let me get this straight. You would rather her be in class learning about history from a book. Meanwhile, I'm taking her out of school for 3 days so she can, like,
3 days.
yeah, 3 days.
Okay, so it wasn't like a month, like you were
No,
doing a residency or
no,
something.
but like she'd already missed enough, days in the semester. So she was like borderline excessive absences. And this is a straight A kid. So I'm like, what are you guys doing to go support the kids whose grades are struggling or who have difficult home dynamics or having a hard time getting to class or have mental
Because
health
this
problems?
doesn't even really feel like support. This
Right.
feels like policing.
It does feel like policing, and well, I mean, I could wax poetic about all the reasons I think it happens, but you're like, we are prioritizing the wrong things.
Mm-hmm.
Wrong
Yeah,
things.
absolutely. Absolutely. Well, this has been, oh my gosh, such a pleasure. I have learned so much. I'm gonna feel much better as a parent because I feel like there's a lot of like Gen X parents out there that are like, listen, I'm just helping my kid figure out how to like slide by a little bit and like know how to give that level of energy versus like 100%
Yeah, I'm
everywhere.
here for you anytime you need that because we got to keep each other sane in this circus.
Crazy world. Exactly, exactly. So, Amber, what is the best way that people can connect with you if they want to read more about some of your career exploits or what else is on your mind?
Honestly, the best place, as cliche as it is on LinkedIn because I do a lot of my writing these days and
I know.
working for LinkedIn. I use our platform a lot. So, Amber Naslund on LinkedIn, you can find me there. And if you want the unhinged side of me, I used to be really active on Twitter, but now I'm more active on Threads, like Instagram's kind of version of Threads. So you can find me there
Mhm.
at Amber Cadabra.
Amber Cadabra. Okay, I feel like that's going to be a whole another interview where we talk about the Amber magic syndrome.
It's not that interesting of a story. That like that handle came from, I joined Twitter. I didn't want to use my real name because I didn't know what that thing was going to be about. And I made Amber Cadabra up on the spot and it stuck. And I still get emails from people who are like, "Dear Miss Cadabra," because they think that's my
Oh,
actual.
Kadabra. Oh, okay. I love that because they're like, yeah, that's got to be your last name. That's amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the Speaking with Intention podcast. My name is Dr. Erica Pryor, your host. You have been with us with Amber Naslund. We'll talk to you and see you next time. Bye.